800 meters underground. No light, no air. Just children digging, starving, forgotten. When President Traoré stepped into that hell, what he saw shattered a nation's conscience. But here's the question: how did the world let a multinational child labor camp thrive? Right beneath our feet. The deeper we went, the less the world made sense. The tunnel mouth was barely wide enough for one man. Jagged rocks scraped my shoulder as I adjusted the lamp tied to my helmet. I could hear nothing at first, just my breath heavy against the rubber mask and the soft click of our boots on wet stone. They told me I shouldn't come. They begged me to stay in the palace, that a president doesn't belong 800 meters underground. But when I saw the photos, blurry, grainy images of small hands gripping rusted shovels, I stopped being a president. I became a witness, and I needed to see it with my own eyes. "Keep close," murmured the informant beside me. His name was Baco. He smelled like old oil and fear. If the air shifts too quickly, it'll collapse. Collapse. That word lingered in the back of my skull like a prayer you're afraid to say out loud. As we moved deeper, the light behind us disappeared. No signal, no sound. Just the hiss of stale air filtering through rock veins and the distant rhythmic clink, clink, clink of metal striking stone. I remember asking myself, was that machinery or was it human? Then the temperature dropped. Condensation dripped from above like a cave's slow tears. The walls turned from jagged rock to slick clay. My boots squelched in the mud. I stepped over old boots, broken rope, and something small cloth. No, a sleeve. A child's sleeve, no larger than my palm. Baco stopped suddenly and held up a hand. He didn't speak. He just pointed. I tilted my headlamp and froze. Ahead, about 20 meters through a cracked opening in the wall, I saw him. A boy, no older than 8, face pale, shirt hanging off bones. He held a shovel nearly as big as he was swinging it methodically into a pile of stone. He didn't notice us. He didn't look up. There were no guards shouting orders, no chains, no fences, because they didn't need them. The earth itself had become the prison. I stepped closer, carefully, quietly. The boy paused to wipe his forehead, not with his hand, but with his shoulder. His palms were bleeding, blistered, the kind of wounds that don't come from a day of work, but from weeks of survival. Then I saw it. In the corner of the cavern, behind a pile of discarded helmets, another pair of eyes. 2 girls, one cradled the other, barely older than toddlers. They stared at me unmoving, too afraid even to blink. I wanted to speak, to scream, but the words stayed stuck in my throat, crushed beneath the weight of the silence. Suddenly, Baco tugged at my sleeve. "We have to move. This isn't the only chamber." But I couldn't move yet. I needed to look longer. I needed it to burn into me. Because if I ever forgot this moment, I might one day forgive it. And that I could never allow. As we turned to crawl deeper into the tunnels, my headlamp caught the boy's eyes for a split second. He froze. Our gazes locked. And in that moment, there was no title, no power, no flag. Just a man looking at a child who'd been abandoned by the world. He didn't ask for help. He didn't cry. He just kept digging. If you only look at numbers, you'll never hear the sound of one child breaking under a mountain of silence. Journal entry from President Traoré. After the descent, I stepped forward slowly, knees creaking in the tight space boots pressing into the loose, damp earth. The boy didn't look up. He was too busy with the rhythm, the same rhythm that had probably kept him alive. Swing, drop, scrape, breathe. I cleared my throat. My voice caught the dust, raw and dry. I tried again, softer this time. "You don't belong here." He froze. For a heartbeat, the entire tunnel seemed to pause with him. The shovel slipped from his hand and landed with a soft crunch on the stone pile. He turned his face toward me cautiously, like a wild animal sensing movement, but too exhausted to flee. His eyes, wide sunken, ringed with grime, met mine. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, but there was no childhood left in his stare. Just instinct, just endurance. I lifted my flashlight higher, angling the beam past his shoulder, and that's when I saw them. Not one child, 7, maybe 10, crouched in the shadows, wedged into crumbling side tunnels, barely tall enough to sit. Silent, still, covered in dust and fear. A girl with her knees hugged to her chest blinked, slowly dazed. A boy with a torn shirt clutched a lunch tin empty. Another child, smaller, lay curled against a wall, unmoving, a rag stuffed under his head as a pillow. My breath hitched. The walls felt closer now, the silence louder. These weren't miners. They weren't even workers. They were ghosts the world hadn't buried yet. I reached up and tapped my earpiece. The static crackled. Colonel Cabore. I whispered, voice trembling. We found them. Immediate extraction. Bring medical and lights. There was a pause, then a clipped response. Yes, Mr. President. We're coming. I turned back to the boy. He hadn't moved. He just stared as if waiting for the catch, some hidden rule that would punish him for believing this was real. I knelt down slowly, my knees sinking into the dust. I didn't touch him. I didn't dare. You're safe now, I said. No reaction. Not a blink. Just watching. Then movement. Behind him, one of the smaller girls crawled forward on all fours. Her fingers dug into the dirt. Her hair was matted, her lips cracked. She didn't speak. She just reached out and touched the flashlight in my hand, as if to test whether the light was warm or whether this too was just more darkness wearing a mask. And then it happened. A beam of white light sliced through the corridor, clean, sterile, unmistakably from above. It cut through the dust, the damp, the rot, and landed softly on the boy's back. Footsteps echoed behind us. Voices, stretchers, real people. I turned and saw the first medic drop to their knees, arms open. Let's get them home, someone said. The boy didn't move immediately, but the girl, she did. She crawled into the beam, blinked twice, then stood, wobbly, barefoot. She walked toward the light, and just like that, the darkness lost its hold. She sat quietly on the ground, legs folded, a battered cloth doll gripped tightly in her hands. Her skin was streaked with grime, and the tip of her nose was raw from cold or tears or both. But she wasn't crying now. She was still, unmoving, almost invisible among the debris and darkness. Traoré knelt beside her, slowly, careful not to startle her. His knees pressed into the cold clay floor, soaking through the fabric of his trousers, but he didn't notice. The girl's eyes, wide and unfocused, stared past him. She didn't even flinch when he whispered, "You're safe." Her fingers tightened around the doll, but she didn't speak. The president stayed there silent, letting the moment stretch. Around them, medics were moving children one by one into waiting stretchers. Voices called names. Supplies were passed down. Boots echoed along the stone walls. But to him it was all muted, distant, like sound underwater. His eyes drifted from the child to the doll in her lap. It was missing an arm. The face had been stitched, unstitched, and restitched by hand. Its fabric was darkened by dirt, but the heart sewn on its chest remained a tiny red thread. Heart crooked but whole. She'd kept it through all of this. He felt something twist in his gut. Not pity, not horror, something older, something heavier, like betrayal. His mind flashed quick, uninvited. A press room in Geneva, where executives shook his hand and smiled too wide. A satellite image shown to him last year, vague black and white outlines of mining pits in the east marked low risk. A stack of reports from international watchdogs, stamped and sanitized. No evidence of human rights violations. Rumors dismissed. Letters ignored. Complaints under review. He had signed trade deals, encouraged foreign investment, posed beside those same logos now etched onto helmets found in this hell. This wasn't just a crime, it was a cover-up. And somewhere along the way, intentionally or not, he'd let it happen. Traoré looked again at the girl. She hadn't moved. Her doll rested in her lap like an offering. He felt the edges of shame brush against his chest, unfamiliar but searing. This wasn't just a failed policy. This wasn't just a forgotten corner of his country. This was a wound he had helped keep open. A medic came over and gently tapped his shoulder. "We need to get her up now, sir. She's severely dehydrated." He nodded and stood back watching as they coaxed the girl up and carried her away. She didn't look back. When they were gone, Traoré remained in place for a moment longer, the stillness of the tunnel pressing against his shoulders like stone. Dust hung in the beam of his flashlight. The walls around him felt closer than ever. Then he lifted his gaze upward. There it was, the shaft, a thin cylinder of space stretching toward the surface. Nearly 800 meters above, a pinhole of light flickered far too small to warm anything but visible. Waiting. He stared into it. So far. So faint. And yet for the first time in this place, it felt like something was watching back. He exhaled, slow and full. Then he whispered, not to anyone in particular, not even to himself, but to the space itself, to the weight of what he'd seen. This changes everything. And from that moment on, the descent was no longer about how far they had fallen. It was about how far he would go to bring them back up. The doors to the presidential study closed with a quiet thud. Outside, aides murmured papers, rustled, the state machine spun as always. But inside, Traoré sat alone, shoulders hunched, collar, undone sleeves rolled up, not as a president this time, but as a man staring into the abyss of his own government. On the mahogany desk before him, scattered like the aftermath of a storm, were files no one was ever meant to see. He opened one. Safety audit, Mine Sector 9A. Stamped in bold red, compliant. He flipped the page. Attached a photograph of smiling workers in clean uniforms, holding signs that read, "Zero incidents this year." Fake. The audit was falsified. The workers hired actors. The safety inspector's signature had been duplicated from a 2021 timber export license. Another folder, this one heavier, transaction trails, foreign payments routed through shell corporations, sudden deposits in local officials' accounts just weeks before mining expansions were approved. Then the blueprints, tunnels dug outside permitted zones, deeper than legally allowed, branching corridors leading nowhere except now he knew to children hidden in the dark. Traoré leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. His country, his name had been used as a stamp of legitimacy for a network of exploitation dressed in the language of progress. And the world had clapped. He stood, adjusted his tie, walked toward the mirror. It was time. The press conference was announced with only 2 hours' notice. The national broadcaster cut regular programming. By the time Traoré stepped up to the podium, the room was a sea of flashing cameras and wired microphones, each one hungry for something to break. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. There has been a betrayal, he began, voice steady but taut, like a string pulled tight. Not just of laws, but of children, of our future. He paused, letting the weight settle. In mines operated by international firms under contracts signed by my own government, children have been forced to work in inhuman conditions, buried hundreds of meters underground. This is not speculation. It is fact. He looked into the cameras. I have seen them. A beat of silence. Then chaos. Shouts. Flashes. Reporters leaping from chairs. Questions fired from every direction. How long has this gone on? Which companies were you aware? Traoré didn't answer. He simply said, I will not let silence be our legacy. Across the nation, the impact was immediate. A mother dropped a spoon into a pot of stew, tears welling in her eyes as her daughter watched from the doorway. 2 boys in a village school huddled around a borrowed phone. The president's voice, barely audible over the static, but clear enough. In the Capitol Cafe, patrons stopped mid-sentence, watching the screens as foreign language headlines rolled in. Breaking child labor scandal rocks West African nation. President admits human rights breach under his watch. Global mining giant under fire after shocking discovery. In one clip that would go viral within hours, a young girl held a photo of her cousin missing for 6 months and whispered to a reporter, maybe now, someone will find him. Traoré stood behind the podium long after the questions faded. He looked out not at the reporters, but at what they represented, a country wounded, but watching. This wasn't the end. It was the reckoning. The room was cold, deliberately so. Air conditioning set just a touch too low, designed to keep everyone alert, uncomfortable. Around the table, a perfect oval slab of black obsidian imported from Brazil, sat 6 men in tailored suits. Not one of them local. The only other person in the room without a necktie was Traoré. It was just past midnight. No press, no aides, no translators, just the weight of power cloaked in silence. The silver-haired man at the head of the table cleared his throat and leaned forward, palms open. His Rolex caught the light. Mr. President, he began, voice smooth and rehearsed. First, allow me to say how deeply disturbed we were to see those images. No one condones the exploitation of miners. This must be A tragic misunderstanding. A pause. He gave a thin smile, the kind carved for cameras and courtrooms. The operation in question is subcontracted. We are investigating, but let's not lose perspective. These are isolated incidents not reflective of the partnership we've built over decades. Traoré didn't respond. He reached into the leather folder beside him. Slowly, with the deliberateness of someone lowering a blade, he laid a thick dossier onto the polished surface. The sound of paper on stone echoed in the sterile room. The top page bore a single photograph, a boy's hand, small and blistered, gripping the handle of a shovel. Blood dried around the fingers. The executive shifted uncomfortably. Traoré looked at no one in particular when he spoke. "You call bloodied knuckles a misunderstanding?" No one answered. He flipped the page. More images, more testimony. A report from a doctor describing oxygen deprivation in a 9-year-old girl. A hand-drawn map of unauthorized tunnel branches. Receipts of security bonuses paid to a local official in cash. Then, without raising his voice, he continued. "You knew, maybe not the details, maybe not the names, but you knew something was wrong, and you looked away." The silver-haired man clasped his hands together. "With respect, sir, global operations are complex. We rely on local compliance, and local compliance." Traoré cut in sharp but composed. "Your company's compliance officer hasn't stepped foot in Sector 9A for 3 years, but you reported annual audits signed, sealed, and approved." He leaned forward. "You fabricated the safety, you exported the danger." One of the younger executives interjected, trying to recover the narrative. "President Traoré, we understand your outrage truly, but we must also consider the economic impact of shutting down even part of this operation. Jobs, energy supply, regional stability." Traoré's gaze didn't flicker. "Do you know what regional stability looks like 800 meters underground? It looks like a child too afraid to cry." Silence. Outside, rain began to tap softly against the window. In another world, a normal night was passing. But here, in this hermetically sealed chamber of power and profit, something had shifted. A line had been crossed. Traoré closed the folder gently, but definitively, as if sealing a coffin. "From this moment," he said, "every operation under your name is suspended pending criminal investigation. Assets frozen, access revoked. Your jets are grounded until further notice. I suggest you inform your board." The silver-haired man blinked slowly. "Mr. President, with all due respect, this could escalate. International arbitration sanctions?" "Let it." Traoré stood. "You've mined our land. Now you'll face the weight of our law." He didn't wait for response. He turned, walked to the door, and paused only once, hand on the handle. "We're not just resource-rich," he said quietly. "We're conscience-rich. And that's something you never thought we'd dig up." And then he left. The ink was still wet when President Traoré placed his signature on the bottom of the page. Executive Order 012, subject immediate suspension of all industrial mining operations within national territory. Effective immediately, he slid the document across the table to his chief legal advisor, who stared at it like it was a lit fuse. "Have it broadcast," Traoré said. "Tonight, every channel, every language." The advisor hesitated. "Sir, this will trigger international panic. Shareholders, embassies." Traoré looked up sharply. "We're not negotiating with trauma. We're ending it." Within the hour, the government's communication office went live. The press was briefed. A single paragraph translated into 6 major languages was transmitted across national airwaves, foreign newsrooms, and embassy circuits. "In the interest of national integrity, public welfare, and human dignity, all mining operations within national borders are hereby suspended pending full investigation into violations of international labor law, child protection statutes, and environmental safety protocols." It was clear, cold, final. No loopholes, no delays. By midnight, armored trucks rolled out from the capital in convoys, headlights slicing through wet roads and forest mist. Each vehicle carried riot police equipped with crowd control gear, searchlights, and sealed enforcement orders. At Mine 9A, the same shaft where Traoré had descended days earlier, helicopters hovered low, illuminating the compound as workers poured out of barracks in confusion. Uniformed officers fanned out quickly, securing entry points and seizing hard drives from admin buildings. Loudspeakers blasted instructions in multiple dialects. Nearby, a group of foreign engineers demanded answers. One held up a laminated contract and shouted, "You can't do this." An officer responded simply, "We just did." At Mine 14B in the east, a company executive attempted to bribe a local commander. The offer was rejected. The man was handcuffed. The video, discreetly filmed by a junior officer, would go viral by morning. Across the country, the same story played out on loop-sealed gates, confiscated keys, empty control rooms. Shock turned to anger. Anger turned to silence. And then, the sound stopped. One by one, the drills fell quiet. The earth, which had trembled for decades under the bite of steel and greed, now stood still. For the first time in living memory, the veins of the land were no longer being carved open. The rumble of industrial extraction, once the background hum of progress, was replaced by something alien, almost sacred. Stillness. In a remote village bordering one of the shuttered mines, a grandfather lifted his head and listened. The noise he'd grown old beside the sound that had stolen his son, then his grandson, was gone. He whispered a single word, "Finally." Back at the presidential palace, Traoré stood at the window of his office, overlooking the quiet city. Behind him, reports were still printing. Calls were still coming. Allies were withdrawing. Threats were forming. But outside, under a sky heavy with clouds, something felt different. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply watched, hand resting on the glass, as a new kind of silence settled over the capital. This wasn't peace yet, but it was the first breath of justice. And beneath the soil where small hands had once bled against rock, the earth could begin to close its wounds. The tribunal hall was quiet, too quiet for a room so full. Rows of officials, diplomats, and journalists sat shoulder to shoulder, but no one stirred. No one shifted in their seats or whispered to their neighbors. The silence wasn't polite, it was reverent, as if everyone sensed that what they were about to hear would not just change a nation, it would haunt it. At the center of the room, raised slightly on a platform, sat Aminata, 13 years old, thin with tightly braided hair and a green dress a size too big for her small frame. Her hands gripped the wooden edge of the stand in front of her. Her knuckles were pale. She didn't look at the audience, only at the microphone. A legal officer asked if she was ready. She nodded once. Her voice, when it came, was small but clear. "My name is Aminata Diallo," she said. "I was taken to the mine when I was 10. There was a shift in the room, barely audible. A collective breath pulled in. She continued. "I don't know what day it was. There weren't days underground. Just work. Just sleep. Just dark." She paused, searching the distance in her mind. Her fingers tapped once on the wooden railing. "I slept on rock. No blanket. Just this old bag I used to wrap my head. There were rats. I hated the way they touched my legs at night. Sometimes I would sing to make them go away, and to stop myself from going crazy." Aminata cleared her throat, her voice steadying. "There was one song. My mother used to hum it when she washed dishes. I would hum it in the tunnels. I don't know the words, but it was soft. It helped me remember." Traoré sat at the front row, hands folded but clenched tight. From where he sat, he could see the faint bruises still on her arms, like shadows that hadn't faded. She looked down for a moment, then up again. "They told us not to stop digging, not even when we were tired. We were underground so deep we couldn't hear storms. We didn't know if it was night or morning, just dark. Always dark." A few cameras clicked softly in the background. A journalist's hand trembled as she took notes. "There was a boy, Issa," she said. "He was 6. He cried a lot. They hit him once for singing too loud. After that, he stopped singing. But I didn't. I sang for both of us." Her voice wavered for the first time. "I used to think, maybe this was the only world left. Maybe the sun was gone. Maybe I would die before seeing it again." She turned her head slightly. Her eyes found President Traoré's. For a moment, the room disappeared. "And then you came," she said simply. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Traoré's lips parted, but he said nothing. His eyes were glassed with unshed tears, and when he blinked, one slipped free and ran down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. Aminata looked back to the microphone. "I'm not scared to talk now. I want people to hear. I want people to remember." She paused again. "Because even when you're underground, you still know when you're being forgotten." Silence. And then softly her final words, "I thought I would die without seeing the sun." A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. One official dropped his pen. A translator removed her headset, too overwhelmed to speak. Traoré stood slowly. He didn't clap, no one did. Applause would have cheapened it. Instead, he simply bowed his head toward Aminata. A gesture not from a president to a child, but from a man to someone braver than himself. The next child was called simply as F. His full name wasn't read aloud, not for legal reasons, but because he hadn't spoken it aloud in years. He was 12, maybe. No one knew for sure. He wore a clean shirt given to him that morning, but the sleeves hung past his elbows. His eyes stayed low as he walked to the stand. The tribunal chair asked if he'd like to read or speak. He whispered, "I'll say it." The microphone caught his breath before his words. "They told us," he began, "that the drill would crush us if we stopped." He looked up briefly as if to check if anyone had laughed. No one did. "They told us it was alive," he continued. "The big machine. It had a name. We called it the mouth. It was hot and loud. It made the walls shake. And when it got closer, we knew someone had to keep working. Or else." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. From the front row, Colonel Kabori scribbled something into a worn notebook. His face, as always, was unreadable, but his hand trembled slightly at the wrist. "They gave us shovels," F said, "but no gloves. So our hands would tear. When it bled, they said, 'It means you're doing it right.'" He paused. A cough. "Then there was no bathroom, no soap. Sometimes we drank water from the same bucket we washed our cuts in. One boy got sick and slept too long. They dragged him out." F looked away from the mic. "I don't know where they took him." Silence. The tribunal official offered him water, but he shook his head. A moment later, a younger girl, no more than 6, was brought forward by a counselor. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she clutched a sheet of paper in her hands. It was a drawing. She held it up with both arms still too thin for her age. The drawing showed a foot. Her foot. A large black rat was crawling over it. A droplet of red marked the heel. The lines were jagged, chaotic, but the message was clear. Gasps rippled through the room, not from shock, but from the sheer crudeness of the truth. In a single child's scrawl, the world saw what data reports and press releases never captured. Traoré sat motionless. Kabor turned the page in his notebook and kept writing. His pencil made the only sound in the room, a rhythmic scratch like a shovel dragging across gravel. More children followed. Some spoke in full sentences. Others offered short, sharp phrases like bruises that had been waiting years to surface. "We worked until our eyes stopped blinking. They said if we told anyone, our mothers would disappear. We slept under rocks. I named mine Kaba because it didn't fall on me. I forgot the taste of fruit. I forgot my sister's voice." At one point, the electricity flickered in the tribunal chamber. Just a brief stutter in the lights. But a few children ducked low instinctively. One screamed. An aide had to escort her out. When the lights steadied, silence reclaimed the room. The testimonies continued, one after another. Ghost stories not of the dead, but of the living children who had survived being buried alive not under earth, but under neglect, greed, and silence. As the final speaker left the stand, Kabori closed his notebook and exhaled, the breath shaky in his chest. He didn't look at the president. He didn't need to. The message was already carved across the pages he held in his hand. The tribunal adjourned for the day, but no one moved immediately. They sat still, as if standing too soon would dishonor what had just been spoken. Outside the hall, the afternoon sun cast long shadows, but for the first time it touched faces that had lived too long in darkness. And deep within those eyes, the world could begin to see not just pain, but testimony. Not just wounds, but warnings. The chamber lights had dimmed. The final witness had stepped down. Pages of testimony lay stacked like fragile bricks of truth on the tribunal bench. Even the media had fallen silent, cameras still rolling, but no longer hungry for sound bites. The air felt heavy, not from heat, but from the sheer weight of what had been said. All eyes turned as President Traoré stood. He hadn't spoken all day, not during the testimony of F. Not when the girl held up her drawing, not when the microphone crackled with the voice of a boy who said he had forgotten his sister's voice. But now as he rose, the silence became anticipation. Not expectation, but need. He took his time walking to the podium, the same one where he had once confirmed the unthinkable child labor buried beneath foreign contracts and national shame. But this time he did not come to confess. He came to promise. He placed both hands on the podium and looked out not at the cameras but at the front row where the children sat, the survivors, the witnesses, the forgotten voices that had finally spoken. "I have listened," he began. His voice was calm but unwavering. "And what I've heard does not belong only to this chamber. It belongs to all of us. This is not a tragedy of circumstance. It is a failure of structure, of protection, of humanity." He let the words settle. "Then justice will not be a hearing. It will be a law." A quiet rustle passed through the crowd. "Today I am signing an executive mandate to establish a national compensation fund. Every child forced into labor, every family torn apart will receive reparations. Not as a gift, but as a debt, paid by those who profited from pain." He reached into his coat and drew out a second document. "This morning I approved the establishment of the Witness Protection and Restoration Unit, a permanent division within the Ministry of Justice. Every child who testifies will be given medical care, psychological support, and safe housing. They will not disappear again." But he wasn't finished. He lifted a third document, thicker, bound in blue and sealed with the national crest. "And within the next 30 days, I will bring before Parliament the Children's Protection Bill, a comprehensive law that bans all forms of child labor, creates a public oversight body, and criminalizes institutional complicity." He paused, his voice tightening. "No longer will our laws be written by foreign contracts. No longer will our silence be purchased. The days of invisible children are over." There was no applause yet, just the rising hum of something heavier than celebration, resolve. He stepped down from the podium and walked toward the survivors. The room made space without being asked. As he knelt in front of the children, he lowered his head, not out of guilt, but out of promise. "You gave us your truth," he said. "Now we give you our protection." Aminata looked at him, silent but steady. Traoré rose again, not just as president, but as witness, listener, and defender. And as he exited the chamber, flanked not by security, but by the children he vowed to protect the nation, watched and knew the reckoning had passed. Now came the rebuilding. The first ad dropped just after sunrise. It opened with warm music, soft piano bird song, and slow-motion shots of smiling children in pristine uniforms. They laughed as they ran across manicured schoolyards, holding hands beneath banners that read, "Opportunity for All." In the corner of the screen, Solurium International. A narrator's voice, male, gentle British, said, "For over 20 years, Solurium has partnered with West African communities to build a brighter future. We support education, sustainability, and local empowerment because progress means nothing if it leaves our children behind." Then came the hashtag, Partner for Progress, a logo. A smiling teacher. Fade to white. Traoré's chief of communications hit pause and stared at the screen. Unbelievable. In the Situation Room of the presidential media wing, the screens lit up like wildfire. Influencers across multiple platforms had already begun posting curated photos, brightly dressed children holding branded lunchboxes with the company logo, community murals with slogans like, "Together we grow," and staged interviews with carefully selected parents declaring how grateful they were for foreign opportunity. One post by a lifestyle vlogger with 4.2 million followers showed her handing out crayons to students in a company-sponsored school captioned, "Such an inspiring day visiting Solurium's rural education program. This is what real impact looks like. Partner for Progress. No child left behind." The view count was climbing by the minute. "Turn up the volume," Traoré said from the corner. The next clip was slicker, faster. Flash cuts between clean water wells, solar panels, laptops in rural classrooms, and a smiling African boy saying, in clearly rehearsed English, "Thank you, Solurium." No mention of mines. No mention of shafts. No Aminata. No F. Just a weaponized, fantasy-polished broadcast ready and designed to erase memory with image. "They've launched a full-blown PR assault," muttered Kabor, arms crossed. "This isn't defense. It's counterinsurgency." Another aide turned toward Traoré. "Sir, they're framing the tribunal as a localized misunderstanding. Multiple international outlets are already running pieces about economic retaliation and anti-development hysteria. On one screen, a popular news network aired a panel discussion. A corporate ethics advisor smiled politely as he said, "We must be careful not to let isolated incidents derail decades of progress. These companies bring infrastructure jobs and stability to regions that would otherwise be left behind. Let's not forget mining feeds economies." Traoré watched silently. Another panelist added, "And who benefits from shutting down these operations?" That's the real question. He didn't need to say it. The subtext was clear. Power was shifting and power was angry. On another channel, a regional governor, once publicly silent, now declared the tribunal a politicized distraction. "They're trying to wait us out," Kabor said. "Bury the truth under white noise." Traoré finally spoke, voice low, but cutting. "No," he said. "They're trying to overwrite it." He stepped closer to the screen, showing the ad loop, bright children paper flags, shallow smiles. "This isn't cleanup," he said. "It's erasure." The room fell quiet. Someone finally whispered the question hanging in the air. "What do we do?" Traoré's eyes didn't leave the screen. He saw the smiling boy again holding the lunchbox. His face too smooth, his backdrop too clean, the lighting too perfect. He thought of Aminata humming to herself in the dark, of F clutching his shovel like a shield, of a girl drawing a rat on her own foot, and then slowly, firmly he answered, "We don't compete with their fiction. We tell the truth so loud, the lie has nowhere left to hide." Outside, clouds gathered over the Capitol, but inside that room the storm had already begun. The briefing room was packed, walls lined with national and foreign press. Tripods, microphones whispered speculations. The energy was taut electric, like the pause before a storm breaks. Everyone knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. President Traoré walked in through the side entrance, flanked not by bodyguards but by two young tribunal witnesses, Aminata and F, seated quietly to the side. Their presence said more than any opening line ever could. He stepped behind the podium, the national crest emblazoned on the front, and adjusted the microphone with slow precision. The room fell silent. 3 weeks ago, he began, voice steady but unmistakably sharp. You heard testimony from the mouths of children who were forced to work underground, forgotten, abused, hidden from law, and hidden from light. He paused. The stillness in the room deepened. "And in the past week, you've been shown something else." He gestured behind him. A massive digital screen flickered to life. On it, the now infamous Solurium International ad began to play, the one featuring joyful children in crisp uniforms, waving flags, eating lunch from shiny branded containers. Laughter, bright music, a cheerful narrator. "Partner for progress." The clip ended. Before anyone could react, Traoré raised a second hand. The opposite screen turned on. No music, no narration, just silence. The screen showed the same children, but this time they were not laughing. They were beneath the surface, their faces smeared with soot and dust, illuminated by the weak beams of headlamps. One of the girls, clearly recognizable from the ad, held the same lunchbox, not in celebration, but as a makeshift water container. A boy in a tattered uniform dug into stone, his hands wrapped in cloth, blood soaking through. The footage wasn't grainy. It was recent, sharp, unmistakable. A voice off screen, clearly one of the children, whispered, "If we stop, they say we die." Gasps rippled across the room. Cameras jolted into focus. Fingers scrambled across keyboards. Traoré turned back to the audience. His expression didn't waver. "These," he said, gesturing to the first screen, "are not actors." He turned to the second screen. "These are survivors." The footage continued. One boy looked directly at the lens. His lips moved. The translation subtitled below, "They filmed us after, told us to smile or we'd be sent back." I smiled. I didn't want to go back. The room broke into stunned murmurs. A journalist in the second row stood visibly shaken. "Mr. President, how did you obtain this?" Traoré answered simply, "We didn't." They came forward. He gestured toward the children seated behind him. They asked to be heard. They wanted the world to see both faces, the one they lived and the one that was manufactured. The silence returned heavier than before. Solurium's campaign, he continued, is not just a lie. It is a continuation of abuse, a new form of exploitation dressed in smiles and hashtags. He stepped down from the podium, walked to the front of the stage, and looked directly into the wall of cameras. To every corporation watching this, he said, voice low but fierce, "If you think we will allow you to rewrite the truth with better lighting and scripted lines, you are mistaken." He turned to Aminata. "To every child who spoke when it hurt to speak, you are not invisible." Then to F, who stared ahead unblinking, "You are not forgotten." He looked back into the crowd. "And from this day forward, the story of this country will not be written by those who buried its children, but by the children who climbed back out and told the world what they saw." With that, the screens faded to black, but the image remained burned into memory. Two screens, one lie, one truth, and a president who dared to let the world choose which one to believe. The shift didn't come slowly. It came like a rupture, a collective crack across the face of a manufactured reality. 40 minutes after President Traoré's press conference ended, the hashtag #PartnerForProgress was still trending, but not for the reasons Solurium had planned. The first viral hijack came from a mother in Koudougou. She posted a photo of her 11-year-old son, eyes half closed, an IV in his arm. The caption read, "This is the progress your partners gave me. His lungs are filled with dust. He hasn't spoken in 2 days." Then came another. A father shared a photo of his daughter's hands, calloused, cracked, bandaged with strips of an old shirt. Her fingers stopped growing at 10 because she spent 2 years gripping a shovel in the dark. By the end of the hour, Partner for Progress was unrecognizable. No more stage smiles, no influencers with filtered lighting. Now it was children curled in hospital beds, parents holding tiny shoes found near tunnels, voices that had been silent now roaring across timelines. Activists joined in. They dug through corporate filings, posted screenshots of donations to community organizations run by shell companies. One posted, "You gave them lunch boxes to hide the bruises. We see you now." Artists began posting brutal political cartoons, one showing a child chained to a golden pickaxe, while a businessman drank champagne above ground. Another with a glowing Solurium logo burning into the back of a crying child's neck. Within 24 hours, the PR campaign was in flames. The company tried to regroup. They pulled the original ad from YouTube and re-uploaded a shorter edited version, "No kids, just infrastructure and water pumps." But it was too late. Comments flooded in by the second, "No kids, Muras, no truth. You can't unfilm what you filmed. Scrubbing your sins won't make them clean." Even influencers who had once praised the company began backpedaling. One deleted her original photo and posted an apology, "I was misled. I feel sick that I helped them sell a lie. I stand with the children." By the second day, news outlets around the world had picked up the backlash. A French newspaper ran the headline, "PR Suicide, when corporate lies meet child testimony." Solurium's board issued a damage control statement. "We are listening. We are investigating. We take all concerns seriously." No one believed them. The stock price dropped 11% before noon. By sunset, it was down 26%, and trading had been temporarily frozen. A trending tweet summarized it best: "You buried kids and built a brand on their silence. Now the silence is over." In the digital age, the lie had a short shelf life, but the truth, it had staying power. It was nearly midnight when the knock came, not at the front entrance of the palace, but the private door to Traoré's study. 3 quick taps, then silence. Traoré didn't move at first. He was seated alone, a mug of untouched tea cooling beside a flickering lamp. The rain had returned, beating softly against the tall windows. Somewhere in the dark, a clock ticked slow and relentless. The knock came again, slower this time, more hesitant. He stood and opened the door. Minister Banza stood in the hallway, shoulder-soaked tie, askew lips pressed into a hard, bloodless line. He looked like a man carrying something heavier than he had words for. "Come in," Traoré said. Banza stepped inside, careful, as if the walls might be listening. His right hand never left the inside pocket of his coat. His left trembled slightly at the fingertips. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he pulled out a sealed envelope, thick, official, marked with the faded insignia of the Ministry of Industry, and laid it gently on the desk between them like a live wire. Traoré stared at it. "What is it?" he asked. Banza didn't sit. He didn't blink. "It's the truth," he said, "and it's poison." The president picked up the envelope, slit the seal, and pulled out the contents, 4 documents. The first was a memo stamped "confidential," marked just 3 days old. It was short, cold, and damning reopening of Sectors 6 and 8 to proceed per adjusted timelines. Public coverage to remain limited. All child relocation to be handled discreetly. Refer to Phase 2 under Special Export Code EBX9. The second page was a logistical chart, names equipment transfers new contractors registered under shell companies. The third, bank statements, familiar names, old allies, and the fourth, a single scribbled note unsigned. The president is emotional, he'll move on. We have interests to protect. Traoré said nothing. His eyes scanned the pages twice, his jaw locked. Then slowly he placed the documents back into the envelope and lowered it onto the desk. The room felt colder than the rain outside. Banza finally spoke again, his voice low. They're planning to move the children again? Quietly, to deeper shafts, out of reach. He swallowed hard. They're building a second darkness, Mr. President. Traoré turned away, walking toward the window. The city below shimmered under the storm, beautiful, distant, unaware. He placed one hand on the cold glass and whispered almost to himself, "Even my walls bleed secrets." Behind him, Banza shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know who else to bring this to," he admitted. "They're watching me, watching all of us." Traoré nodded once, still facing the storm. "You did the right thing," he said. "That's how this begins." One man steps forward. He turned back to Banza. "But now the question is, how many will stand when we shine light where it hurts most?" The minister didn't answer, and he didn't have to. Outside, lightning cracked across the horizon. Inside, beneath the soft glow of a dying desk lamp, a new war had begun, not against corporations or foreign boards, but against the machine within. The machine that wore the right pins, said the right words, toasted the reforms, and then in shadows rewired the lock. The machine that knew Traoré might win the story, but planned to win the silence. The signature was swift, no ceremony, no cameras, just a single stroke of the pen on Decree 17 in array, an executive order that granted Minister Banza full authority to lead a sovereign anti-corruption task force reporting directly to the president. It superseded all bureaucratic barriers, dissolved legal immunity for senior officials, and activated a dormant section of the Constitution, one rarely touched, never before tested, for use in times of institutional betrayal. Traoré passed the signed decree to Banza without a word. The minister took it with both hands, the paper heavier than it should have been. His knuckles had stopped trembling, but his eyes still held the weight of the envelope from nights before. "I will not fail you," Banza said. Traoré met his gaze. "Don't protect me. Don't protect your friends. Protect the children." What followed happened over 72 hours, but felt like a single breathless moment in national memory. Cabinet members were summoned one by one to closed-door hearings inside the old Justice compound. Some came calmly carrying briefcases and weak smiles. Others arrived under escort, their phones confiscated at the gate. No one knew who would walk back out. Files were opened, contracts examined, testimonies cross-referenced, bank accounts frozen. Then came the arrests. The Minister of Energy, once the loudest supporter of the mining miracle, was escorted out of his compound by plainclothes officers, head down, hands clenched. The Deputy of Trade attempted to flee. He was detained at the border. Even the President's chief procurement officer, someone Traoré had dined with dozens of times, was charged with document tampering and obstruction. Each name that fell was met with shock, then silence, then applause from the streets. But the one that broke Banza came last. His mentor, the man who had once brought him into public service, the man who taught him that politics at its best was about stewardship, not survival. Minister Umar Tal, former Minister of Infrastructure, a national hero, decorated, respected, remembered for rebuilding roads after the floods, a father figure in the party, and the architect of the Phase 2 mine reopening plan. The evidence was clear: an email chain, a hidden transaction path through a foreign consultancy, and his initials on a memo approving silent child relocation. When Banza arrived to serve the arrest warrant, Umar Tal was already waiting. He stood beside his garden pruning roses. No resistance, no denial. Only a quiet, "So, it's you." Banza said nothing. His throat felt thick with gravel. He reached into his coat and handed over the signed order. Tal scanned it with tired eyes, then smiled a sad, almost proud smile. You were always going to be better than us, he said. That's why we kept you close. Banza's lips parted, but no words came. He raised the handcuffs slowly, and then as he locked them gently around the wrists of the man who had once held his shoulder through his oath of office, he began to cry. Not loudly, not messily, just quiet tears falling like testimony. No cameras, no spectators, only petals from the rosebush falling onto the stone steps. That night the headlines ran red purge and the Capitol justice turns. Inward president cleans house starting with his own, from mentorship to mugshot, the fall of Umar Tall. But inside the palace, Traoré didn't read the papers. He sat at his desk watching the list of arrests grow, the ink drying like wounds across the page. This wasn't vengeance. This was surgery. And the nation was bleeding its poison out one name at a time. The lights dimmed across the nation at exactly 20 Surzeren. Streets hushed. Restaurants turned down their music. TVs blinked on in living rooms, bars, village squares, and dusty roadside stalls. Even in remote towns with intermittent power, diesel generators rumbled to life. People gathered around a single screen waiting. The presidential seal appeared. Then Traoré. No podium this time. No grand marble hall. Just a wooden desk, a national flag behind him, and the deep, heavy lines beneath his eyes, the mark of someone who hadn't slept in days, not because he was tired, but because he was awake to too much. He folded his hands once, then looked straight into the lens. My fellow citizens, he began, what we have uncovered in these past weeks is not just corruption, not just exploitation. It is a betrayal that spans years, borders, languages, and lives. The silence on the other side of the screen was total. This betrayal was made possible by one thing: silence. Silence in the boardrooms. Silence in government halls. Silence in living rooms where suffering was dismissed as rumor or background noise. He leaned forward slightly, and the cost of that silence was paid in childhoods. A pause, a breath, a truth too painful to rush through. Some lost years, others lost limbs. Some lost names, a few lost their lives, and all of them all lost the trust that someone somewhere would speak for them. He let the words linger. But I am speaking now. Images began flashing behind him, soft, almost ghost-like, projected on the wall as he continued. Faces from the tribunal, testimonies, hospital beds, arrests, courtrooms, mine shafts left abandoned and sealed. To those who orchestrated this abuse, whether from an office, a motorcade, or a villa abroad, no title will shield you. No passport will protect you. No silence will save you. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. No one is untouchable. Around the country, people whispered those words aloud. We are not doing this for revenge. We are doing it for the boy who still hums lullabies in the dark. For the girl who thought she'd never see the sun. For the families who learned that survival doesn't mean safety. A flicker of emotion crossed his face, but he didn't blink it away. He let it show. There are those who say we are risking our economy, that standing against giants will break us. But I ask you, what is the value of growth if it is built on the broken backs of children? He sat back slightly, voice softening, not from weakness, but resolve. We are building something stronger than a mine. We are building a nation that knows how to say enough. He took one last look into the camera. We will never pay that price again. Not in your name, not in mine, not ever. Then the screen faded to black, and across the country, across the world, there was silence. But this time it was the silence of truth being heard, not forgotten. The old shaft entrance at Sector 6 no longer roared with drills. Instead, it stood silent beneath a sky now painted with birdsong. A wooden arch hand-carved by local artisans framed the new sign above the Gate Center for Memory and Healing, Aminata Clinic, Sector 6. The mine had been sealed for months. The tunnels, reinforced machinery dismantled and toxic waste cleared. What remained was not erased, but transformed. The deepest corridor now led not to a drill chamber, but to a trauma counseling wing lit with soft lanterns and children's paintings hung along the walls. Some of those paintings depicted sunlight. Some showed trees. One drawn by F himself showed two children holding hands above ground, standing beside a shattered chain. Outside, the once barren courtyard had been turned into a community garden. Children in donated boots watered rows of cassava and hibiscus, tended to by both survivors and volunteers. A shaded patio held long wooden benches where parents could sit beside their children and watch not for danger this time, but for butterflies drifting lazily through the morning air. In the refurbished clinic wing, Nurse Kone leaned over a girl's shoulder, checking a healing scar on her arm. Her white uniform had ink marks on the sleeve, gifts from grateful little hands learning to draw again. Aminata stood in the doorway. She was taller now. Her braids were fresh. She wore a soft yellow dress and new sandals that actually fit. When Nurse Kone looked up, her smile was instant. Aminata didn't say anything at first. She simply stepped forward and wrapped both arms around the nurse's waist. Tight. Familiar. "You remembered me," she said into the fabric. Nurse Kone whispered back, "I never forgot." It was Kone who had first lifted Aminata from the transport truck. She'd carried her inside wrapped in a wool blanket, the girl's voice hoarse from days of silence. It had taken 3 weeks for Aminata to speak, 4 more to laugh. Now her voice was steady. Her laugh came freely. "I can help now," Aminata offered, pulling back. "I want to read stories to the new girls. Some of them still hum in their sleep." The nurse nodded, eyes glassed with emotion. "You already are helping." Down the hallway, F sat at a wooden table with 3 younger boys showing them how to fold origami birds from donated newspapers. Every so often, he glanced at the nearby exit sign, the one that pointed not down but out toward the surface. One of the clinic counselors, a woman named Madi, passed by the mural wall and paused in front of a framed photograph. It showed the moment the first child had been pulled from the mine, caught in a shaft of sunlight, arms raised, dust trailing from his back like wings. Below it, a plaque read, "They survived, now they lead." At sunset, a small ceremony took place beneath the garden arch. Dozens of former child workers, now students in uniforms of deep indigo, stood shoulder to shoulder as local musicians played a soft, drum and chora melody. Parents watched, hands over hearts. Then slowly, as if reclaiming a rhythm long buried, the children began to sing. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. A new song, not to survive the dark, but to welcome the light. Where trucks once rumbled with ore and guards barked orders over clanging drills, now stood rows of wooden desks shaded beneath canvas tarps. The first makeshift school, built from repurposed scaffolding and salvaged sheet metal, stood where the processing yard used to be. A hand-painted sign hung over the entrance, "Tomorrow begins here." Inside, children sat cross-legged on mats, chalk dust floating in warm beams of sunlight. There were no blackboards yet, just slabs of plywood propped against bricks covered in shaky letters and uneven lines. But the learning had begun, and it was loud. Laughter spilled from the corners. Pencils tapped against tabletops. A girl with puffy braids sang the alphabet off-key, while her younger brother giggled through numbers. Every corner of the room hummed with curiosity, messy, uneven, unstoppable. At the back of the room, a boy named Samba held a piece of paper and stared at it with quiet determination. The pencil trembled in his hand as he etched the first curve. S, then A, then M. The B came crooked, the final A a little too small, but when he finished, he turned to the girl beside him and held up the page. "That's my name," he whispered. "Samba." She beamed. "You wrote it." He nodded. "All by myself." A few desks away, a girl named Hadia held her paper close to her chest, scribbling furiously. The sentence was short, the spelling imperfect, but her letters stood proud across the page. "I want to be a doctor." She brought it to the teacher, Madame Nene, a retired educator who had come out of retirement for this very purpose. Her eyes scanned the writing, and she smiled without correcting a thing. "That's the most important sentence I've read all week," she said. Hadia's smile was small, but it reached all the way to her eyes. Behind the school, volunteers planted young baobab trees to shade the next set of classrooms. Buckets of gravel became stools. Discarded mining helmets were cleaned and stacked for storage bins. Each item repurposed. Each scar of the past turned into a tool for the future. On the wall closest to the front of the class, the children had begun a mural. It showed a large yellow sun rising over the dark outline of a mine. Beneath its stick figures held hands, some with books, some with bandages, all smiling. No guards, no chains. Just children in the light. Traoré visited that mural later that week. He stood in silence for a long time, watching as one of the students dipped their fingers in bright orange paint and added a single new detail, a butterfly hovering over the sun. "Who drew that?" he asked gently. "I did," said a boy with bare feet and a missing front tooth. "Why a butterfly?" The boy thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Because butterflies come when things are alive again." Traoré nodded quietly. "Yes," he said. "Yes, they do." Outside, wind carried chalk dust and the scent of growing things. And inside, buried among broken bricks and tired hands, the future began to take shape, not as policy, not as politics, but as handwriting in the dirt. As the sun dipped behind the red clay hills, the field behind the Sector 8 Memorial Center came alive with a quiet hum. Children moved in small clusters, each holding a rice paper lantern in their hands. Some shaped like stars, others round and soft like moons. Each one glowed faintly from the candle inside, flickering with the wind and the beating of small, nervous hearts. It was the first lantern ceremony since the mines were closed. No speeches were planned. No camera crews were allowed. This wasn't about records. It was about release. Earlier that day, the children had been given markers and encouraged to write their names and dreams on their lanterns. No edits, no corrections, just truth. Some wrote single words. Others filled every panel with sentences. One simply drew a large sun and added a smile beside it. Aminata's lantern read, "I dream of a country where no child knows what a shaft is." Efsa said, "I want to build schools. Big ones. With books, not dust." One lantern shaped like a book carried the words, "From miner to poet." As dusk turned to night, the children gathered in a wide circle. Volunteers helped light the small candles inside each lantern, and one by one they began to rise. It started slowly. The first lantern struggled, trembled in the air like a newborn bird. Then gently it lifted, spiraling upward, golden against the twilight. Another followed. Then 5 more. Then dozens. Some caught the breeze and spun. Others drifted steadily, climbing higher and higher until they joined the stars. The field began to glow. Not from machines, not from floodlights, but from hope in motion. President Traoré stood at the edge of the field, hands clasped behind his back. No guards flanked him. No officials spoke. He wore a plain white tunic, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, as if he too had helped shape the lanterns. In truth, he had asked not to be seen tonight, not as a leader, but as a listener. A small girl tugged at his sleeve. Her lantern was slow to rise. He knelt beside her and helped steady the base. "What did you write?" he asked softly. She pointed to the side. It read, "I want to dance without fear." They watched together as it lifted, joining the others. Hundreds now. A constellation of dreams, each one breaking gravity, each one glowing brighter than the shaft lights that had once burned underground. Some adults wept quietly. Others held hands. But the children, they laughed. Not the laughter of escape. Not the laughter of shock. The laughter of children who believed that tomorrow might truly belong to them. One boy shouted into the sky, "That one's mine, look, it's flying next to Aminata's." She smiled. "Yours is going higher." Traoré looked up, eyes reflecting the drifting lights. He said nothing. But in his silence was everything: the weight of justice, the ache of memory, and the awe of what could come next. Above them, the lanterns floated on, each one carrying a name, a wish, a scar, and a promise. The sky, once a place they only dreamed of seeing from below, now held them gently, and it glowed. The clock above the National Assembly chamber read 11:42 p.m. Outside, the city was quiet, holding its breath. Inside, the chamber buzzed with tension. The Child Protection Act, Bill 103A, sat atop every desk. Its pages were underlined, highlighted, dog-eared by weeks of negotiation, public hearings, and midnight revisions. And now it was time. President Traoré stood at the podium, not in presidential garb, but in a plain blue shirt, sleeves rolled. He began without pleasantries. "What we do tonight will outlive us. It will speak when we are no longer here to speak for ourselves. It will answer for the children who once cried underground and heard no reply." Some members shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward. "This bill is not about revenge. It is about memory. It is not about punishment. It is about prevention. This is the line in stone saying we will never allow that darkness again." The bill called for a nationalized child labor oversight commission, independent investigations into all supply chains tied to extractive industries, severe criminal penalties for violators, and mandatory recovery programs for all survivors. But most importantly, it would embed the right to childhood into the Constitution. Opposition came as expected from industrial blocs. One senator from the Copperbelt stood. "Mr. President, if we pass this, foreign investors may walk. Entire sectors may collapse. Are we ready to trade short-term jobs for long-term ideals?" Traoré replied. "We traded our ideals for decades, and the price was paid by children buried alive. I say let the collapse come if that's what it takes. Because we're not building an economy anymore. We're building a soul." The room stilled. At 12:08 a.m., the final vote was called. Hands rose, lights tallied. 121 in favor, 16 opposed, 3 abstained. Applause didn't erupt, it built. Slowly, like a wave pulling strength from every corner of the chamber. Some lawmakers stood, a few wept. And in the gallery above where Aminata and F watched beside other survivors, hands clutched each other tight. The future had passed. On the slope above the sealed mouth of Sector 8, a long granite wall stretched into the horizon. Etched across its smooth black surface were the names of every rescued child. No last names, just first names in bold even spacing. Some had flowers tucked beneath, others had paper stars or drawings taped beside them. And just above the entrance to the museum, built into the hill, 4 words carved deep: "We were seen. We matter." This was the Hall of Hope, once a tunnel of exploitation, now a global memorial center. Tourists came from across the world, human rights groups, students, journalists, and leading them today with her soft voice and steady gaze was a 15-year-old girl in a pressed white shirt and red scarf, Aminata. She spoke without a script. Her voice carried history like a river carries stones. "This was the shaft where I first sang to stay alive. That beam above us held for 12 years without being reinforced. Some children here were as young as 6. We didn't speak when we cried. We learned to cry quietly." She pointed toward the art installation paintings made by survivors. One showed a girl holding a candle, another a map of the country shaped like a child's hand. Beside the artwork stood a shadow box of old tools, shovels, helmets, broken boots. "We kept them," Aminata said, "not to glorify the past, but to remind us what silence lets happen." Visitors walked slowly. Some held hands. One child whispered to his mother, "I didn't know children weren't always safe." Aminata stopped at a corner display, a photo of President Traoré visiting the first classroom, chalk dust on his jacket. "He listened," she said. "That's why we speak now." Before the group left, she placed a fresh, white flower beneath a small plaque that simply read, "To those who never came back." And as the wind whispered through the open hill, it carried the echo of voices that once sang in the dark and now guided the light. The Grand Hall of the Capitol was filled to capacity. It was the final day of Traoré's presidency. No parades, no confetti, just rows of people, teachers, miners, students, and hundreds of children filling the red-seated chamber. Traoré stood at the podium, the presidential seal behind him for the last time. "I did not come here to be remembered," he began. "I came here so that you would be." He scanned the faces, some familiar, some new, all part of the story. "I came to office during a time of crisis. I leave during a time of reckoning. But we are not broken. We are reborn." He took a long breath. "Let our children dig into books, not stone. Let them build dreams, not tunnels. Let their names be known for what they create, not what they survived." People rose to their feet. Not with thunderous applause, but with silent, reverent standing, honor, not performance. He looked to the side of the stage where Aminata and Bansa stood together. "The next chapter is yours." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card the size of a business note. He read it aloud. "Justice isn't a monument. It's a promise kept every day." Then, without waiting for ovation, Traoré stepped down. Out through the chamber, out into the open sun, and somewhere above him in that wide sky, still carrying the lanterns of memory, the promise held and glowed. This story is not just about one man or one country. It's about the choices we make when confronted with truths we can no longer ignore. President Traoré's journey began in darkness, literally 800 meters underground, but it was never just a descent into a mine. It was a descent into complicity, silence, and institutional betrayal. And more importantly, it became a climb back toward light with the children leading the way. The most powerful revolutions often begin not with weapons, but with witnesses. Traoré did not fight with anger, he fought with clarity. He did not act to protect his power, but to protect the powerless. His greatest act of leadership was not in speaking over others, but in listening to the smallest voices, children who had no platform, no shield, no reason to hope yet dreamed anyway. In many ways, this is a story of reclamation, of turning trauma into testimony, of transforming tools of oppression into symbols of learning and art. It reminds us that justice is not just about punishing the guilty, it's about rebuilding what was lost and protecting what could still be saved. What moved me most was the simplicity of the children's dreams. I want to dance without fear. I want to be a doctor. From miner to poet, these are not fantasies, these are birthrights, and the fact that they were ever denied is a scar on us all. But this story offers more than grief, it offers hope with teeth. It tells us that systems can be changed, that nations can grow a conscience, that integrity, even when lonely, can be louder than corruption when it's backed by courage. It challenges all of us to ask, what are we willing to risk to protect those who cannot protect themselves? What systems in our world today still bury children, not in stone, but in silence? And you watching this right now, what kind of future do you want to help build? A future of tunnels and shadows, or one of books, dreams, and sunlight? Let me know in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.